This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nizzahon, and it's Saturday, and that means it's time for another edition of Nizzanotes, my weekly vlog series where I talk about limited magic. We're in the middle of Streets of New Capenna season right now. We're going to continue with talking about Streets of New Capenna today, and we're going to look at a list that is sort of simultaneously 5 tips for succeeding in New Capenna Limited, and also 5 things that are problematic in New Capenna Limited. It sort of overlaps into both. In general right now, I'm hoping things smooth out, but right now, I think this might be the worst limited format we've ever had in the Arena era. That's right, worse than Forgotten Realms. So let me explain why, while also giving you some tips for how to succeed in this format, even if it is kind of awful. So the first thing about the format is it's very fast. This is a weird thing in general, that this format would be fast, because usually these formats that are really multicolored faction focused, they're kind of slow. You set your mana up and stuff like that early, and then you play powerful multicolored spells. If you try to do that in this format, you can get wrecked. This format has lots of really good 2-drops, lots of really cheap creatures that are monocolored, and if you let your opponent get out ahead of you on the board and then try to catch up, it's very difficult to do. They didn't put enough cards at common and uncommon that can catch you back up. There's a few of them, but for the most part in this format, you need to be aware that it's fast, and you either have to be prepared to deal with fast decks or be a fast deck yourself. On a related note, the second thing I have here is play a bunch of 2-drops, and also all of them are better than they look, and they're all playable. I was skeptical about some of these 2-drops, like the 1/1 flyer, lifelink, citizen bird, for example. But you got to have 2-drops in this format, whether you're the beatdown or whether you're a more defensive deck, because you have to be getting bodies onto the table as early as possible, and it almost doesn't matter what bodies they are. You want to either get out ahead of your opponent if you're the aggro deck, or you want to try to trade with your opponent to make the game go longer. You can't not put things on the board. Now, you can use things like Strangle and stuff like that, in place of 2-drops. They do sort of serve a similar purpose, but you really need to add to the board in this format. You could really get punished if you don't. Very hard to get back ahead of an opponent if they end up, if you're not playing anything until turn 4 and your opponent goes 2-drop, 3-drop, you've pretty much already lost the game in this format. That's just how this format works. It's a fast one, and you need to have a lot of 2-drops, and all of that is very strange, again, for this set that has a 3-color theme. But that sort of brings me to my next point, which is this isn't really a 3-color format. Again, this one maybe is the weirdest, given that this format is focused on these 5 crime families who are different 3-colored factions. And so, going into the format, I assumed a decent chunk of the time you were going to end up in a deck that is sort of relatively evenly divided between the 3 colors. And then you would, fix your mana and stuff like that in the early game, and then cast these powerful multicolored spells like other formats like this. But if you do that in this format, to tie things back into, you need a lot of 2-drops, and the format's fast. If you spend your first couple of turns fixing your mana with, various, the lands in the format, for example, or if your mana is inconsistent and you can't add to the board because your mana is bad, you are really starting behind the 8 ball. And that is not a good place to be in a format where, again, there just aren't enough ways to catch up again from behind. So you end up wanting to be mostly a 2-color deck, and you do frequently splash a 3rd color that's sort of the 3rd color in your family, but it's a splash. The best decks in this format splash a 3rd color or are just straight up 2 colors. They have better mana overall, generally speaking, and they have a lot of 2-drops, and they're aggressive. That's kind of what you need to do in the format. The next point is, I think, the one that is perhaps the most damning for the format, and that is that the broker's colors, that is green, white, and blue, are just way better than the other colors in the format. Those decks have the best cards at every rarity in them. So what I mean when I say a broker's deck, I mean a deck that's blue, white, green, white, or potentially all three colors with a splash. You just have so many really great commons. You have access to both Jewel Thief and Inspiring Overseer. You have access to cards, shield counters have been really strong. You have access to those. The uncommon that's a 2/1 double striker with a shield counter is one of the best uncommons in the set. You just have access to all the best stuff, including 2-drops, which is very, very important. If I haven't already mentioned, make sure you're playing 2-drops. Every single 2-drop in the set is playable, and every single 2-drop in the set you should consider a little better than you would have thought it was going into the format. But the problem is, already it's very challenging to be anything but an aggro deck in this format. And for me, that's a big problem. You want to be doing other stuff. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible. You don't have to be in a broker's deck to succeed, and you don't have to be an aggro deck. What I am saying is that these are the decks that will succeed the most consistently in this format. And it's a problem that there's a much smaller percentage of decks that are doing other stuff that can be successful. And it's really the collection of commons that the broker's colors have access to, including, the 2-colored commons, like the 2/3 that tap something down if you have a counter and that has flying, the 2/3 cat citizen that gains lifelink and +1/+0 if you tap a citizen. You just have access to these very good cards at low rarities, and it's just hard for other decks to keep up with you. So that makes the broker's deck significantly better than the others. If you are familiar with 17 Lands, it's a website where there's a lot of data about limited, based on how games are going and stuff like that. And if you look at like the top 25 cards in the set based on win percentage, 24 of them are brokers cards, and that is a problem. So there's color imbalance. But if you want to succeed in this format, ending up in blue-white or green-white or blue-green-white is a decent place to go. Now, here's where I'm hoping things will change. Once everyone's kind of in on brokers being the best deck, it should become harder for brokers decks to be good, and that will make it so other decks are, more available and are better because less people are drafting them. So it might correct itself. But so far, even after a lot of people have been saying brokers is just forced brokers, basically, in the format, it's still pretty doable. There's just so many good commons for it that the table can support a lot of brokers drafters. And again, that's a problem. In terms of the other color pairs and families and stuff, I also like the Maestro's decks and the Obscura decks, but they have a harder time consistently having an early game, and Brokers doesn't. Brokers is more mid-rangey, and those two are a little more controlling, and that makes it a little harder for them to work consistently. Meanwhile, Cabaretti, this is sort of the 5th tip for success. You should mostly avoid Cabaretti and Riveteers. So I'm saying, force Brokers as long as it's open, but also avoid Cabaretti and Riveteers mostly. I do think the black-red Sacrifice within Riveteers is a good deck. That's one of the color pairs within these two that we're looking at here that is good. But beyond that, the Cabaretti deck has a hard time. You'd think this format's aggressive, so maybe the most aggressive family would be pretty good, but it just turns out that a lot of the cards at lower rarities for Cabaretti, first of all, you're fighting with everyone else who's drafting brokers for those. And second of all, a lot of them aren't 2-drops. You aren't in a great place. You don't play something on turn 2 that really pushes the game into your favor as much. So yeah, the Cabaretti deck it doesn't get it done very consistently, and neither do the Riveteers. Those two families right now aren't especially good. You'll find yourself, if you're drafting those, if you drafted this format enough, and you look at which of your decks have done well at this point, you'll notice a lot of them have blue-white or green-white in them, or they're blue-green-white. That also includes, to a certain extent, Obscura, but, that's where the best commons are in the set. So, yeah, format has problems. It mostly feels like more controlling decks are pushed out of the format. You have to run a lot of 2-drops. And it's funny because in a lot of ways, This set reminds me of one from long ago at this point called Magic Origins, which was a core set. And it was a set where 2-drops mattered a ton, but it didn't feel quite as weird that aggressive decks, aggro decks, were at their best in that format because it wasn't a 3-color set. And I hated Magic Origins as a limited format. I'm hoping this one doesn't end up in the same place where it's all about just, jamming as many good 2-drops into your deck and going from there, because that's basically what you got to do here to succeed consistently. You also need to, mostly only be a 2-color deck. And you need, to make sure that, you're drafting. First of all, it is still important to draft what's open, but you should be leaning pretty hard into the various brokers deck and leaning away from the Cabaretti and Riveteers decks, with the exception being the black-red one. And, I guess Cabaretti has a good deck within it too, because green-white is one of the ones I like a lot. But so they both have one deck, but it's kind of okay. But mostly those 2 color pairs, 2 factions, haven't been very good. All right, so, not the most positive edition of Nizzanotes here. Like I said, I do hope the format improves. I hope people all start overdrafting brokers, and that thus brings brokers decks back down to earth and allows the other decks to be better, but we'll have to see. All right, let's do a crack-a-pack to close out this edition of Nizzanotes. As usual, we'll look at a pack one, pick one scenario. I'll talk about how I feel about each of the cards in this pack, and then I'll tell you what I would first pick. All right, here's our pack. Our first common is Broker's Hideout. This is, of course, the brokers like Evolving Wilds land. I was talking about how you don't really want to be a 3-color deck in this format, like, full-on 3 colors, because it'll make your mana less consistent, and that's true even with a lot of fixing. But fixing does still matter. You usually want to be splashing at least a 3rd color. And so, taking lands like that isn't a bad plan. But I don't think we ever want to take one, pack one, pick one in the format. Next up, we've got Body Dropper. This is a pretty nice common, and this is part of the reason, I said a minute ago that the black-red sacrifice deck is pretty legit. Like, if you're going to be in Riveteers, that's kind of the premier deck for it. And Body Dropper is part of that, as is, the Signpost Uncommon, the Forge Master or whatever, who does 2 to your opponent anytime you sacrifice something. Those 2 together really make that deck do its thing, and there's lots of sacrificing in the format that you can get value out of. So I do like Body Dropper, and I think I would, let's say there's nothing else in this pack. I don't know how that would happen, but hey, I think I probably would take Body Dropper over Broker's Hideout. Next up, we've got Prize Fight. This is a nice little card. I mean, it does a good job of helping decks that have larger creatures or creatures with shield counters kill other things, and it also gives you a treasure, which is some nice fixing. I would still take Body Dropper over it, though. Next up, we've got Majestic Metamorphosis. Something I could have included in the list, and it kind of goes without saying, I think, in a format where you mostly want to be aggressive. Tricks are good. They're better than usual. Like, if you're ahead of your opponent, they're tapped out, they just played some creature that they're counting on being able to block you with and trade at least. If you attack them while they're tapped out, having played that creature, use the Metamorphosis to win that combat, your opponent has very little chance of winning the game. And that's part of the problem here. If your opponent pulls off one of these tricks and just wrecks you, basically erases your whole turn for nothing, in this case, the card replaces itself, it's very hard to come back. So Metamorphosis has been pretty nice as a trick, especially the thing that makes it really good is the draw a card element that makes it so you can really generate the value you want. So I like Metamorphosis. I would still take Body Dropper over it, though. Next up, we have Kaldaya Strong Arm. This thing's fine. Often, if I end up in green in the format, most of the time I find myself blitzing this, and a lot of the creatures with blitz, really, because it can really alter your board permanently while adding another body to the board that will draw you a card when it dies. So it's a nice common. Still would take Body Dropper over it. Next up, we've got Murder. This is an interesting one. So because mana being consistent is so important in this format, where you don't want to stumble on your mana or you're probably dead, anything that costs double colored feels a lot worse in this format than it normally would. That said, Murder is still quite good. Murder can still kill lots of things, including most of the format's bombs. But the fact it's double black, you'll find it coming up more than you'd like. And again, because it's double black, you have to run a certain kind of mana base, and that mana base might lead to you stumbling on mana more. And you also won't be able to come back from behind if that happens. But still, Murder's good. I think it's very close. I think I probably would take it over Body Dropper. Maybe. I don't know. It's funny because it's monocolored technically, but in this format, these double colored cards, which there aren't a lot of, but they all feel kind of rough compared to anything that doesn't have a double, cost of one color. So I think I'd probably still take the dropper over it. Revelation of Power, another trick that's been pretty nice, especially when you're using it on something with a counter, which isn't that hard to do in the format. It's a card that works great in Brokers, and so it's the kind of trick that can just really devastate your opponent. Big Score is next. This card's largely been disappointing. In the early going of this format, I was trying a lot of wacky, more controlling decks, and I had a deck that had lots of a couple of 6s and 7s, and I ran 2 big scores, and every now and then I get to do something cool and ramp into them, but mostly I was just getting wrecked before I could ever get to that point because this format's too fast. And Big Score is definitely sort of a clunky card in a format like this. Paying mana and not adding to the board is more of a liability than it is normally in this format. So don't like Big Score very much. Still on Body Dropper. We've got Security Bypass next, so this thing's all right. I don't love it, but there are situations where it can really work out by helping your creature get through for damage and stuff. I probably wouldn't take it over a lot of the cards in this pack, though. It might make the cut sometimes, but it's not very good. Waterfront District, the blue-black tap land, same thing with these. You do want them, but you don't want too many of them in this format either. Maestro's Charm is next. Charms are good. This one's removal. They're all a little worse than I expected for the same reason, something like Murder is, and that is that your mana, you less frequently end up in a full-blown 3-color deck. So you end up splashing Maestro's Charm all the time, say you're in a blue-black or blue-red deck, and then you're splashing the 3rd color. You play Maestro's Charm, and it's nice, but you can't cast it as often as I would like in the mana bases you end up needing to play in this format. But I think I probably would still take it over Body Dropper. I know it's a 3-colored card, but it's great removal and has some nice other modes. Next up, it's Luxurious Libation. This is a card that's really impressed me. Frequently it just turns into a fireball that lets you kill your opponent. When it's not doing that, it's a trick that helps your creature win combat. We just talked about how those are extra good in the format. And generating the Citizen is nice too. It gives you some nice value. Sometimes, doing both of those things can really alter combat in your favor. I think I would take Libation over the Charm and Body Dropper. That's how interesting this format is. As somebody who normally doesn't love combat tricks, I'm advocating taking a combat trick over a 2-drop that's a pretty nice build around and a 3-mana Charm. But in this format, this trick is really good, whether you're using it to finish your opponent off or to win combat. So I would definitely take it over Maestro's Charm. Next up, it's Rob the Archives. This is another card that doesn't really alter the board in any good way for you. It's kind of a nice card to have in the extreme late game, but those don't come up as much as one would think. So yeah, still on Libation. We have a pretty nice rare, Sanguine Spy, a 3-mana 2/3 with Menace and Lifelink, who can sacrifice things to Surveil 1, and it even starts to draw you cards. I think it's a pretty reasonable card, so, I'm talking about how this format is really aggressive and stuff like that. And the way you can counter that, to some extent, is by having cards that gain you life. And the Sanguine Spy does, just being something with lifelink is great. Quasar is a pretty nice card for helping you counter, these aggressive strategies too, because it slowly wins you the game and gains you life, just keeping you out of reach. So there are ways, for sure, to beat those decks, and Sanguine Spy can help you do that. It's close between Libation and Spy, which is crazy. I wouldn't have gone into the format thinking that, but that's just how much this format is sort of turned on its head from what basically all of us expected. I guess I would probably take the Spy in the end here. I do like Libation a lot, but I think the Spy is pretty good. You do, like I said, kind of trying to lean into Brokers is a good idea, and Sanguine Spy, you're not doing that. but I think it is good enough that I'm interested in taking it over the Libation. So I think that's where I'd go in the end here. Again, this format's weird. I'm hoping things straighten out as we move forward with the format and Brokers is more hotly contested as a deck in the format, leading to these other decks becoming better. If that doesn't happen, like I said at the beginning, I don't think it's hyperbole to say this could end up being one of the worst limited formats, or the worst limited format in the Magic Arena era. So hopefully we can avoid that, because this is the format for a while, and that would be pretty rough. So that does it for this edition of Nizzanotes. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future editions of Nizzanotes, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to make sure you're caught up on all the Nizzanotes episodes, you should see the playlist shortly. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting me and the channel, you can on Patreon. Thanks for watching.